Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pavla Vizváry and I am happy that I can speak here to you and I hope with you about the copyright literacy of cultural heritage workers in the Czech Republic with a focus on librarians. Copyright literacy is not only about citing. According to Harris, it includes identifying copyright protected materials, navigating fair use and fair dealing, obtaining permissions and licenses where necessary, and recognizing infringement of copyright law. In this meaning, we can define challenges for cultural heritage workers. First, they should use copyrighted works following the law. That means not only making the collectibles accessible, but also, for example, using materials for education or marketing posters. Second, they should lead users to do the same and finally help users with their copyright tasks, especially when thinking about university libraries and supporting scholarly publishing. And all these challenges are growing in an environment changing by law, technologies, publishing processes, etc. In this presentation, we focus on research on the copyright literacy of Czech cultural heritage workers following the original study initiated by Tania Todorova. General documents such as Statement on Copyright Education and Copyright Literacy of IFLA, but also national stakeholders supported my activity. Adela Fadladová from the Czech Ministry of Culture pointed out my questionnaire. But 5 managers of the Czech professional associations of cultural heritage workers helped me the biggest by distributing my questionnaire. Therefore, I want to thank here namely Karel Hala, Eva Drašarová, Anna Komárková, Vít Richter and Hanna Landová. After the data collection, another critical factor appeared. The social situation caused by COVID-19 led to many exceptions in copyright issues, such as making publication accessible online for university students and workers, or free software for schools to support distance learning. Almost all exceptions lasted temporarily, but they showed what is technically possible. But besides this, there are law limits. And cultural heritage workers should not only know the legal procedures in common times, but also be able to explain their reasons to users. If you are visiting ECIL repeatedly, you have surely heard about the Copyright Literacy Research Series. It started in Bulgaria. The Czech Republic was not involved in the first phase, but it cooperated in the second phase focused on LIS students. To complete the topic's overview, I additionally explored the copyright literacy of Czech cultural heritage workers. In the Czech Republic, there are thousands of them. The Czech Ministry of Culture registered almost 150 archives, including private ones, 500 museums, including galleries as museums of fine arts, and more than 5,300 libraries open for the public. It is a high number of libraries and they are also the best described. But most libraries are so-called non-professional, which means that they typically are open only a few hours a week and operated by interested locals, such as retired Czech teacher. But also in the professional libraries, only about half of the workers had education in librarianship and a majority of them at secondary library school. As I have already said, we used an electronic questionnaire translated and slightly changed from the original study to reflect local conditions. Therefore, we had the same research goal as Todorova set it. To what extent are professionals familiar with copyright-related issues? To what extent are they aware of copyright policies and practices within the country and institutions for which they work? What are their opinions with regard to the inclusion of copyright-related issues in academic education and training? And to what extent are there differences in self-reported literacy levels of professionals across countries? For my research, I add one more goal: to find differences among types of institutions. To get as many responses as possible from all types of institutions, I asked 5 managers of national professional associations to distribute the link for my questionnaire. All of them agreed, and we collected 313 responses between 16th November and 18th December 2019. In the table on this slide, you see the complete demography of our respondents. Both are model values. Therefore, our typical respondent was a woman in her 40s with a master's degree in library science, working more than 20 years in professional processes such as acquisition or cataloging in a professional library. Compared to the research population, our sample contained more men, also only less than a quarter, a little older with a significantly higher degree, more often educated in library science, and working in internal professional processes. Therefore, in population, we can expect worse results than I will show in the following slides. Our demography differs from the population, but it is similar to the multinational study, where some countries did not include archives and museums. That was another reason why we focused on the comparison of types of institutions. To start with our results, we see here the prevailing self-assessment of general awareness in intellectual property. Respondents had some awareness, but they did not feel like experts by far. We did not find statistical differences in the majority of demographic variables, including working experience or position, but higher values were connected with higher study degrees. We also found a difference among institutions where scientific libraries felt the most confident compared to university libraries, followed by archives and museums. A similar trend we will see also in the following results. To get a more concrete picture of copyright literacy level, we asked about the self-assessment in 19 copyright issues. You see the result here. I have to emphasize that I shortened the axis for a higher separation of results. Do not be afraid of the table, also it looks terrible. I helped to read it. When you read topics listed in the table, they are sorted by mean from the best self-assessed. The mean is the thick line in the graph. So our respondents felt the most familiar with licensing conditions in their institution, national copyright law, and national copyright institutions. Self-assessment of institution types differed statistically in almost all issues, except 6 marked with the blue frame. They are the most general, which is national copyright law, and topics with the lowest values, such as both international issues, which got one of the weakest self-assessments also in the multinational study. Compared to international results, the Czech Republic self-assessed highly in general awareness and subtopics, especially in orphan works, but still not so much as the United Kingdom. You see the same graph on this slide, but the results for scientific libraries are marked in green. Their self-evaluation was the highest in almost all topics. The only exceptions were copyright and e-learning practices, where they were the second best, and copyleft, where they got an average self-assessment. On the other hand, they were the best compared to mean in the 3 topics marked with a green frame. They are open access, open data, and open educational resources, licensing for information sources, and copyright and institutional repositories. slide focuses on the worst self-assessed libraries, which were university libraries marked in yellow. They went above average in only 5 topics: open access, open data and open educational resources, Creative Commons licenses, licenses for information sources, copyright and institutional repositories, and international copyright institutions. On the other hand, they self-assessed the most under the average in licensing conditions in your institution, national copyright institutions, copyright and digitalization, and collective rights management organizations. In my opinion, self-confidence in university libraries should be strengthened in the most analyzed topics, especially licensing conditions in organization and digitalization. The last focus for the same graph is on archives in red and museums in brown, because their results were quite similar. They were low compared to all types of libraries, archives even lower than museums. Compared to the mean, both institutions had problems with Creative Commons licenses, licensing information sources, e-learning, and open access and related topics. In addition, archives had a poor result in out-of-print works and fair use. But for me, this was not very surprising, because all of these topics are very relevant for libraries, but not so much for archives and museums. I think that the results should be different if the issues in the questionnaire were more close to the work of other types of cultural heritage institutions than libraries. One knowledge question supplemented the self-assessment. We asked for topics included in the Czech Copyright Act, and all offered answers were correct. On this slide, you see that respondents did not always know that. The first 3 topics received a good enough result, although I think it should be better even here. Orphan works are not so long in the Act and not so much discussed. In addition, the Czech result was quite good compared to other countries. But the last topic showed what other results also supported. Respondents were not very well aware of specific law possibilities to make works accessible to users beyond the most general procedures. We found statistically significant differences in 2 topics. You see the best and the worst institutions above them with their result. You find archives and museums here also, while perhaps not as much as for libraries, the exceptions are still relevant to them. Now we leave competencies and get to attitudes. Czech respondents were not very interested in national and international copyright advocacy. All these results were worse than the international ones. Almost 90% of Czech respondents were not so much or less interested in initiatives of professional organizations in copyright. More than 3/4 were unaware of initiatives for cultural institutions, and more than half of national strategy for copyright. Our respondents only exceptionally expressed their disagreement with the defined claims in the international initiatives in copyright, but they were more neutral than the international group. The most supported claim was not about advocacy, but the services offered by cultural heritage institutions. That showed that respondents mainly were convinced about the connection of their work with the copyright. Still, they have a passive attitude to efforts for better accessibility of works. As we approached their work at the institution, we found a similar trend. Respondents were aware of the connection of their work with copyright, and they were also convinced about the necessity of copyright policy in their institution. But the practice was significantly weaker. Only about 40% of respondents knew about copyright policy or internal regulation in their institution, and almost the same number was sure that they did not have it. Dedication of a person dealing with the copyright issues was even less common. More than 60% of respondents were sure that there was not such a person in their institution. The most common was this worker in university libraries, the least in professional public libraries. These results ranked the Czech Republic not the lowest place, but among the weakest countries in copyright practice in institutions. This graph shows information resources used when respondents needed to solve some copyright tasks. The most popular were websites, followed by publications such as books and articles, and colleagues. Using international organizations was exceptional, the same as in the international study. Again, we found some statistical differences among institutions. Books and articles were the most popular in scientific libraries, professional organizations and discussion lists in public libraries, and university libraries use academic experts. For me, these results were not surprising. I explained them by the availability of individual resources. The last set of questions focused on attitudes to copyright and field education. Czech respondents were convinced about the importance of copyright education, but not as much as the international group. When we look at the university level or continuing education, the most neutral institutions were archives. Despite that, more than 2/3 stated that copyright education at the university level should be included in all degrees. Only 3% choose the answer none. For continuing education, we asked about the form of copyright education. Thematic electronic resources and thematic workshops gained the same best result, followed by consultation on request. We found statistical differences only for distance learning, popular in public libraries, and training courses preferred by archives. Again, this question got different results from the international dataset, where the most favorite form was training courses. You have heard the description of copyright literacy, attitudes and practice of Czech cultural heritage workers, and a brief comparison with the international survey. Czech respondents were highly self-confident, but the practice at institutions and awareness of national and international activities, including exceptions for making works accessible, were not very positive. I perceive the problem in cultural heritage workers' passivity that mirrors identified attitudes in national and institutional practices and policies, weak convictions about the importance of education and preferred form of education and information resources. I am not sure how to make them more active in copyright issues, but what can be done is enlightenment in specific practical copyright opportunities to make works available. Museums and archives were weaker or more neutral in almost all explored areas. The closeness of the questionnaire to the libraries affected that, but we found the same trend in aspects relevant for these institutions. Qualitative research should extend results about archives and museums. But the most interesting result for me, that I want to explore more in future, was the low self-confidence and activity of university libraries. Especially them should be leaders in copyright issues, according to literature and their role at universities. It is precisely these institutions that most have to solve the challenges that I defined at the beginning of my presentation, not only for their work, but also for the needs of their users. Thank you for your attention. You can find a list of used sources in my presentation. And now I am looking forward to your questions.